What happens when the most powerful man in a company is feared by every employee until one small accident cracks his armor? In the quiet town of Ashford, North Carolina, Whitaker, Hearth and Timber is more than a workplace. It is the heartbeat of a community. But behind its polished wood and proud history stands Graham Whitaker, a millionaire CEO whose silence is sharper than anger. People avoid him, shrink under his gaze, and carry their fear like a second skin. Then comes Claire Bennett, a 35-year-old secretary who stumbles literally into his world. One spilled cup of coffee ignites a story that will stretch from boardrooms to break rooms, from hidden ledgers to hospital bills. Along the way, truths surface about money disguised as growth, about friendships turned to betrayal, and about the cost of leadership when it forgets the people it is meant to serve. Can one woman's steady courage and quiet acts of care soften a man who has built his life on control? And can a company built on heritage rediscover what true legacy means, not in numbers, but in dignity? Stay with us as we unfold this journey. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because some stories remind us what really matters. A rain-slick entry mat, a tray of coffee, a building that holds its breath. One misstep, and heat and shame bloom across a custom suit. In the quiet town of Ashford, North Carolina, that tremor would travel farther than the river that cut through its center. If a single accident could tilt a life, this was the moment. Claire Bennett, 35, had risen early with nerves that had their own heartbeat. The morning air was damp, the kind that left her hair frizzed despite the careful blow-dry. She had parked a block away from Whitaker Hearth and Timber, the converted red brick furniture mill that loomed like both promise and warning. It was her first day as executive secretary, and she carried her new role the way she carried the tote slung on her shoulder, heavy, purposeful, filled with things that might help her prove she belonged. In her left hand were onboarding forms that felt heavier than paper should. In her right, a cardboard tray with 2 steaming coffees, one for herself, one intended for a man she had not yet met. Graham Whitaker, the CEO, was more legend than person in Ashford. He was the wealthy man who had saved the old mill from demolition and turned it into headquarters for a heritage home goods brand. He was also the man whose presence made employees scatter down hallways, whose voice on the intercom caused stomachs to tighten. Claire had heard enough to know she would be walking into a building where silence was safer than laughter. The lobby glowed with old wood polished to a deep sheen, brass rails that gleamed under pendant lights, and fresh-cut flowers that fought to mask the smell of rain-soaked coats. The receptionist barely looked up, her smile tight as if borrowed. Security nodded, their eyes quick, then away again. Claire took 3 steps across the mat, her mind on the clock, her heart on the future, and her shoe slid. The tray tipped, both cups arced through the air, one lid staying fast, the other springing loose like a trap. Coffee fanned upward and outward before falling, blooming across the charcoal wool of Graham Whitaker's tailored suit. Time fractured. The receptionist froze, hand over the phone as though even breathing might worsen the damage. Security's chair squeaked as he straightened, papers scattered across the wet floor, spreading her name in ink that bled. Claire dropped to her knees, gathering sheets with steady fingers though her pulse rattled. The sting of embarrassment burned her skin, but she would not let it own her. When she looked up, he was there, Graham Whitaker, 45, broad-shouldered, composed, his face carved into the kind of stillness that could silence a room faster than a shout. Drops of coffee tracked down his jacket sleeve. His eyes were not on the stain. They were on her, as if measuring weight against consequence. He said nothing. The silence was discipline enough. It stretched across the lobby, thick and heavy, a reminder that in this place, one man's disapproval was stronger than the hum of the entire building. Claire rose slowly, the papers pressed to her chest, her chin held at a height that was not defiant but not apologetic either. Her cheeks burned, but her breathing steadied. She offered no frantic excuse. She simply gathered herself and waited. Graham turned without a word, a movement precise as the closing of a door. The receptionist lowered her gaze to the desk, and the guard sank back into his chair. A whisper rippled through the air like the tail of a storm. Human resources appeared as if summoned, guiding Claire upstairs with brisk steps and clipped reassurances. As they walked, she noticed details most people might have missed in their embarrassment. The beams that had survived 2 centuries, sanded and preserved, the tired eyes of Martha Lee, a housekeeper rubbing at her knee as she pushed a cart, the silence that clung to the corridor like humidity after rain. They left her at a desk on the executive floor. A thin envelope waited with her name typed cleanly on the front. Inside was a summons to a brief orientation. The wording was sharp enough to cut. It read less like welcome and more like warning. Claire sat, smoothed her skirt, and placed her tote by her feet. She let the adrenaline run its course until her heartbeat slowed. She had embarrassed herself in front of a man who carried fear like a cloak. She had walked into a building that ran on silence. She had a choice. She could become another shadow among many, or she could decide to remain whole in a place that tried to split people small. Her pulse steadied. The forms were damp at the edges, but the ink remained legible. She set them in order, straightened the stack, and breathed in until her ribs ached. She would not be another person who disappeared into the woodwork. By mid-morning, her inbox chimed. A list of tasks arrived with a precision that felt like challenge disguised as routine. 3 items, stacked neatly. Sort and categorize a set of policy documents layered with cross-references. Produce a same-day snapshot of department productivity. Locate 1 binder clip in quartz blue for an upcoming presentation board. The request for the blue clip read like a smirk. It was the kind of detail meant to trip someone up, to prove they were not equal to the room they had entered. Claire set her pen down, closed her eyes for 1 steady breath, and began to map the day in her head. She blocked time by the hour, matched tasks to steps, and gave each challenge the dignity of order. She would not chase panic. She would meet precision with precision. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and looked at the closed office doors along the hall. Somewhere behind one of them sat Graham Whitaker, a man who believed the room belonged to him. She prepared to show him she did not enter rooms to vanish. By noon, 3 tasks designed to bruise her waited on Claire's desk like thorns. Success or humiliation would be measured in paper, time, and the color of a single clip. The executive floor stretched around her like a museum of order. Hallways were lined with photographs of the old mill, sepia images of workers in suspenders, their faces stern under a century's dust. Beside them hung plaques celebrating growth charts, export milestones, and glossy articles clipped from business magazines. It was pride and nostalgia curated as decor, a place meant to remind anyone who passed that history could be polished into progress. Graham's assistant, a woman with a voice that never cracked above polite, set a stack of policies on Claire's desk. Pages fanned out, tagged in multiple colors, their complexity deliberate. The request was clear, categorized by subject, date, and cross-referenced by department. She had less than half a day. The second task followed like a shadow: produce a productivity snapshot by lunch. Department heads would want different formats. One preferred charts, another raw tables, and one had the habit of pushing back on any summary that threatened his standing. The final request arrived folded into an email with 2 short lines. 1 binder clip, quartz blue, urgent. The wording carried the weight of a smirk. It was not just a test of efficiency, but of endurance, the kind of errand meant to remind a new hire of her place. The specificity was almost playful, but the stakes were not. Failing a task so trivial could mark her as careless before she had drawn her second paycheck. Claire set her pen down, exhaled, and mapped the day. She broke the mountain into hills, sort the stack in layers, assign color tabs by subject, run the numbers with clean formulas and make them easy to check, then face the ridiculous hunt for a quartz blue clip. Step by step, she told herself. Order where others expected panic. She moved with steady rhythm. Pages whispered as she sorted, her fingers finding patterns in the policy language. Cross-references grew like branches, connecting categories across years. She wrote notes as she worked, not just for herself, but for whoever would inherit the files later. Small mercies, hidden in neat handwriting. Department heads arrived with questions, their shoulders tensed for impatience. Claire greeted each one by name, asked short clarifying questions, and wrote notes in front of them so they knew their words were held. Instead of rushing them away, she gave them enough attention to feel respected, but not drained. It was not grand kindness, just the kind that adds up. By late morning, she delivered the sorted policies, pages clean and labeled. The productivity snapshot followed a simple chart with notes on anomalies and a path to improvements. Not perfect, not inflated, but solid. That left the clip. She could have rushed to the supply closet and dropped a single clip on the desk. Instead, she turned the errand into an answer. She searched the building's supplies, called a vendor, and borrowed a small box from the sample room where office accessories were tested for catalog shoots. By the time she finished, she held a slim case of binder clips in a soft gradient sky. Cornflower, slate, sapphire, each carefully nested and labeled. Quartz blue sat among them, calm as water under glass. She placed the box on Graham's assistant's desk. No flourish, just tidy completion. The effect was not just administrative. Word spread the way warmth spreads through a cold body. A laugh escaped the copy room. Shoulders lowered around cubicles. For the first time in months, someone had treated the floor not as a machine, but as a community. Upstairs, Graham received the files, the snapshot, and the curated blues. His face did not change, yet behind his eyes, something eased, an almost imperceptible softening. Control had met competence and found itself outkinded. Claire returned to her desk, aware that silence could carry both threat and admiration. She didn't need applause. She needed the room to feel different, if only by a degree. By the end of the day, small signs told her the change had begun. A joke passed between two assistants in the hall. The receptionist downstairs, the one who had frozen that morning, allowed herself a smile when their eyes met. Even the housekeeper, Martha Lee, lifted her chin in greeting. Word traveled to the kitchen, where people drifted not out of hunger, but out of habit and hope. The scent of burnt coffee and vending machine chips lingered, but conversation filled the space where silence used to sit. Claire sat back in her chair, thinking ahead. If a blue clip could soften the air, what would happen with something more? Tomorrow was another day, another chance to lace the building with warmth. She began to plan a small mercy for morning. Before dawn, a small bakery box warmed Claire's lap as she steered her car through Ashford's still dark streets. Inside were biscuits brushed with honey, the kind that tasted like Sundays when the world was slower and kinder. Alongside them sat a stack of napkins. On each, in plain ink, she had written short lines, nothing fancy, just affirmations about effort, gratitude, and the kind of unseen work that kept a place together. She had not asked permission to do any of this. She didn't need to. Sometimes the only way to change a room was to walk in carrying something gentler. By 7, she was in the company kitchen. The room carried its usual smells of burnt coffee and dusted sugar packets, but she filled it with something new. Real coffee brewed in 2 large pots, one labeled strong and the other easy. She refilled the sugar jar that had sat empty for a week. She placed the warm biscuits on a tray, each one wrapped with a napkin and a note taped across the top. The first face appeared in the doorway just as the clock clicked to 7:30. Martha Lee from housekeeping, her limp more visible on early mornings, stopped short when she saw the spread. She rubbed her knee out of habit, then looked up at Claire. "Help yourself," Claire said softly. Martha picked one biscuit, held it in her palm, then noticed the note taped to the napkin. "Your work makes this place livable." Her lips pressed together, and for the first time all week, a smile broke across her face. She whispered a thank you, but the gratitude was already clear, not long after. Sharon from IT walked in, shoulders rounded from too many nights at a screen. She paused at the sight of the labeled coffee pots, then poured from the one marked easy. She lingered longer than she had planned, standing with the cup warming her hands, breathing in steam. She did not say much, but she exhaled in a way that told Claire the room was doing its work. Ben, the intern, arrived next, pretending not to be starving. His eyes darted toward the biscuits, then away, as if he wasn't sure if he was allowed. Claire nudged the tray closer. He reached for one, then quickly for another, cheeks reddening as he stuffed them into his backpack. A note peeked out from the edge of the napkin. Learning counts as progress. His grin was shy but unmistakable. Ray Collins, the security guard, with a voice like gravel, stopped by on his break. He picked up a cup of coffee and, almost out of reflex, reported that the river was low today. For once, someone actually listened. Claire leaned on the counter, asked a question or two, and Ray's story carried on longer than usual. His posture eased, his words steadier, as though being heard added inches to his frame. One by one, more people drifted in. They left with biscuits wrapped in napkins, notes tucked into pockets and lunch bags. Some read them right away. Others folded them like secrets to be discovered later in the day. It was not theater. It was design, aimed not at winning applause, but at dignity. Small mercies that reminded people they were more than names on rosters or hands on time cards. Upstairs, Graham watched the floor through the glass wall of his office. He had grown used to silence stretching across cubicles, broken only by the clatter of keyboards and the clipped tones of calls. This morning was different. The murmur of voices carried upward, a ripple of laughter, the kind of warmth that could not be ordered into existence. He felt it the way one feels a draft under a closed door, something slipping in, changing the temperature without asking. Control, he realized, did not feel the same when the room was willing rather than afraid. The day unfolded with a quiet ease. People returned to tasks with lighter shoulders. Sharon's team closed tickets faster than usual. Mistakes that often clustered after lunch barely appeared. Claire made notes, not to boast, but to mark the pattern. A lift in numbers was small proof that morale was not fluff. It was fuel. She moved through her own work with the same calm rhythm. When she passed Martha in the hallway, the woman's smile lingered longer than a nod. Ben waved from a desk stacked high with files, a biscuit crumb still on his collar. Ray tipped his cap when their paths crossed near the stairwell. Claire felt a strange steadiness inside her, the kind that came not from praise but from watching a place breathe differently because of one small choice. By late afternoon, as she packed her notes, a new item blinked on the shared calendar. A board meeting, slides prepared, charts polished. The numbers looked fine, almost too fine. Claire flipped through the packet again, her brow tightening. Something about them glowed too perfectly, as though rounded edges had been smoothed more than the truth allowed. She tapped her pen against the page, sensing a current under the surface. Tomorrow would demand more than biscuits and ink. The boardroom smelled of lemon oil and old deals. Polished wood glowed under recessed lights. Brass fixtures caught the morning sun in sharp glints, as though reminding everyone that money had always had the upper hand here. The chairs were wide and heavy, their weight forced back straight, whether in respect or discomfort. Investors from Raleigh shuffled papers as they took their places. A loan officer from a regional bank, a man who had grown up in Ashford, adjusted his tie with a nervous hand. He had known the mill when it was still a mill. He looked around the converted space with both pride and a faint suspicion. The deck sat ready at the end of the table. The first slide promised 15% growth for the quarter. Fonts crisp, margins aligned, colors coordinated, perfection rendered in pixels. Claire sat at the edge of the room, not at the table but near enough to feel its weight. In her lap rested her own notes, not typed, not dressed for show, hand-drawn charts, numbers penciled with care, margins filled with her tidy handwriting. Her calculations pointed not to 15, but to 12.2. Still strong, still enough to reassure, but not the story printed in the deck. When Graham began, his voice carried its usual steadiness. He knew how to win a room by tone alone. "As you'll see," he said, clicking to the first slide. Our growth continues at a healthy pace. 15% over last quarter, across strategic areas. Claire's chest tightened. The phrase 15% rang too clean, too polished. She glanced down at her notes again, numbers that resisted smoothing. She did not wait to be invited. She slipped a packet of her corrected figures onto the side table where the investors could see. Not in the center, not forced. At the periphery, where eyes would find them if they wanted to. The room shifted. It was not noise, but its absence that spoke. Pencils stopped scratching, heads tilted toward the packet. The loan officer leaned forward, his glasses catching the light. He picked up the sheets, flipped through, then passed them to the Raleigh investor beside him. Claire said nothing. Her handwriting spoke for her. Clean rows of numbers, each sum traced back to original reports. Nothing inflated, nothing hidden. The quiet when truth enters a room is a felt thing. It lands heavier than applause, sharper than doubt. Graham sensed it too. His posture did not break, but his hand tightened on the clicker. For years he had shaped meetings, bending them toward his pace, his polish. Today he felt the shape tilt away, not toward chaos, but toward accuracy. He could see it in the investor's eyes, the choice to believe numbers that carried smudges of ink rather than slides that gleamed. One of the Raleigh men cleared his throat. This 12.2, Miss Bennett, is that reconciled against payroll adjustments? Claire met his gaze without flinching. It is, line by line. The rounding in the deck added margins that don't exist in cash. The man tapped his pencil twice, a habit of decision. The loan officer spoke next. I'd rather plan on 12 real than 15 imagined. Ashford doesn't run on imagination. His voice carried the weight of someone who had grown up around paychecks that never stretched far enough. The words settled across the table. Graham stood still, face even, but Claire caught the flicker behind his eyes. Control, long his armor, was slipping. Yet the room did not turn against him. It turned toward truth, which was harder to argue with. She was not dramatic. She was direct. She would not let story outrun fact. Slide after slide clicked by. Investors nodded less at the bright bars on the screen than at the penciled sheets passed hand to hand. By the end of the presentation, respect lay heavier on Claire's work than on the polished deck. It was not applause, but something firmer, a coat set on cold shoulders. When the meeting closed, Graham shook hands with each guest. His voice was smooth, his smile steady. But Claire saw how carefully he avoided looking at her. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to unease. The investors filed out, voices low, caution. One murmured, realism, said another. The loan officer folded Claire's notes into his folder with deliberate care, as if they were more valuable than the glossy slides he left behind. Later that evening, the building quieted. The hum of machines, the echo of footsteps, the chatter in the kitchen all faded into the kind of silence that makes a person hear their own pulse. Claire sat at her desk, her notes stacked neatly again. She thought about the numbers, not in graphs or margins, but in lives. The cost of insulin at the pharmacy downtown, the price of a bus pass that Sharon bought each week, the hours Martha had lost when housekeeping cuts trimmed her schedule. Each reduction smoothed into growth on a chart, each clean percentage hiding a bruise in the lives of people who worked here. The deck had promised perfection. Her figures had offered air, enough to breathe, enough to be honest. She leaned back in her chair, hearing the emptiness of the floor above her. Somewhere, Graham would be sitting alone, weighing polish against truth. Tomorrow would bring another day, another set of numbers, another chance to decide whether honesty was risk or salvation. After hours, when the building emptied of its rush and noise, the mill spoke in smaller sounds. A mop bucket squeaked down a corridor, the wheel catching on a seam in the old floorboards. The sound was thin, but it told a truth no spreadsheet could. When benefits are shaved, pain shows up in places leaders rarely stand. Claire lingered at her desk, longer than she needed to. She had delivered her notes, filed her reports, and checked her calendar for tomorrow. Still, she stayed, Something in the silence drew her forward, as if the building itself had more to say once the voices of the day had quieted. She walked the halls slowly, noticing details she might have missed in the daytime glare. The paint near the stairwell scuffed from heavy carts, the fluorescent lights that flickered at the edges, making shadows dance on the brick, the faint smell of bleach rising from fresh mopping. Martha Lee pushed her cart along the baseboards, her body leaning heavier on one side. Claire stopped to greet her, not with quick politeness, but with time. She asked how her day had been. Martha paused, gripping the mop handle, and gave the sort of half-answer workers learn when no one expects to listen. Claire stayed quiet, waited longer than most. Slowly, more words came. The pension match had been paused last year, Martha said, and she had stopped even looking at her retirement account. What's the use, she murmured. She rubbed her knee as she spoke, the same knee she had been favoring all week. Cataracts, she admitted after a while, were the real trouble. She had delayed the surgery because her health coverage now paid less, and the difference was too steep. She said it lightly, but her eyes drifted away when she finished, as if embarrassed by the truth. Claire carried the weight of those words in silence. Later, near the loading dock, she spoke with a shipping lead who was locking up. His hands were rough, nails stained with grease. He mentioned in passing that he had been stretching his insulin doses, making them last longer than prescribed. The cost had crept up again, and his coverage didn't stretch as far as it used to. He laughed when he said it, the kind of laugh that was really a shield. Claire did not laugh. She nodded, let the gravity sink in, and tucked the fact away with care. In the break room, she noticed cupboards nearly bare, snacks and quick meals gone before mid-afternoon. She asked a clerk about it, and he shrugged. People time their hunger now, he said, almost casually. Eat early, or there's nothing left. His words landed sharper than he meant. Each story carried a bruise the quarterly charts had hidden, numbers smoothed into clean growth, while the people inside the growth were left thinner. Claire listened, not as a manager, but as someone taking a pulse. Each answer she gathered as if it were a vital sign: heart rate, blood pressure, temperature of a body slowly starved. She stood in the hallway afterward, the building nearly dark, and let the knowledge wash through her. Brand stories meant nothing if the people who carried the brand went without. The polished beams, the framed photos, the glossy brochures, they all rang hollow when Martha could not see clearly, when the shipping lead stretched medicine that kept him alive, when hunger was scheduled like a shift. Her chest tightened. Anger wanted to flare, but beneath it was something steadier resolve. She made a promise to herself, silent and private. If change was possible, it had to begin here, in the places where harm had been felt the deepest, not in the boardroom slides or the headlines in glossy magazines, in the hallways where a mop bucket squeaked, where workers stretched dollars and health past their breaking point. She walked back to her desk, the corridors nearly empty now. Her tote sat under the lamp, casting its shadow on the floor. She pulled a sheet of paper and wrote a simple request for a meeting with Graham Whitaker, not to argue, not to win points, but to tell him plainly what it felt like to stand on the other side of his decisions. She folded the note and placed it where his assistant would see it first thing. Then she gathered her things, turned off the lamp, and stepped into the night air. The river's sound followed her as she crossed the lot, steady, relentless, carrying the weight of everything the mill had hidden beneath its polished surface. Tomorrow, the truth would need a voice. Some confrontations do not need volume. They need names and the steady courage to say them. At dusk, river light spilled against the old bricks outside Graham's office. The window panes glowed gold, catching the slow movement of the water below. Inside, the room was still, almost too still, as if even the furniture knew the air would soon shift. Claire stood with a folder in her hands. She had written her request the night before, and it had been granted without comment. She had walked the hallway steady, though her palms carried the sweat of nerves. Now she faced the closed office door, knocked once, and entered when the deep voice inside told her to. Graham sat behind his desk, posture straight, jacket unbuttoned but presence sharp as ever. He gestured to a chair. She sat, folded her hands, and breathed once before she spoke. She did not accuse. She did not sharpen her words into weapons. Instead, she told stories. She spoke of Martha Lee, whose cataracts had been postponed so often that the world around her blurred at the edges. Claire described how Martha rubbed her knee as she mopped, working through pain that surgery could have eased. She spoke of the shipping lead who rationed insulin doses, his laugh covering the risk he carried into every shift. She spoke of the cupboard in the break room, emptied by mid-afternoon, and the clerk who had told her quietly that hunger was time now, not by appetite but by supply. Each account was plain, not exaggerated, not softened. Stakes measured not in percentages but in eyesight. Bus fare, blood sugar, human costs, given shape and name. Graham listened, but his body leaned back as though the desk between them could act as a shield. When he answered, his words carried the practiced weight of a man fluent in numbers, fiduciary duty, shareholder confidence, margins, and survival. He spoke of a market that rewarded efficiency, of towns lost because companies failed to cut quickly enough. His voice did not waver. It had been trained for steadiness. Claire let him finish, then slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. On it were 3 names, beside each, a single-cost cataract surgery, insulin coverage, bus stipend, no analysis, no grand speech, just names and numbers. The room felt smaller. The light through the window dimmed as the sun lowered, shadows stretching long across the brick. Graham stared at the page. His jaw tightened. His gaze lifted toward the glass, where his reflection hovered, superimposed on the river, a man looking at himself, but not meeting his own eyes. He had lived much of his life being impressive, not forgiven. Control had been his language. Now the words on that sheet of paper pressed against him in a way control could not push back. Something, hairline, cracked, though no one else would have heard it. Claire sat in silence, letting the weight rest where it needed to. She did not rush to fill the space. She did not plead. She had said what mattered. Finally. Graham set the paper down, fingers still resting on the edge. He did not admit she was right. He did not dismiss her either. His silence was different from the one he had given her on the morning of the coffee spill. This silence was heavier, personal, tinged with something that resembled thought rather than judgment. She rose slowly, thanked him for his time, and left the office. The door closed behind her, but the sound was not sharp. It carried a different note, softer, like a hinge that had just begun to loosen. The hallway was quiet as she walked back to her desk. Outside, the river kept moving, steady, indifferent, yet bearing witness. Before dawn, long before the building stirred, an envelope would arrive, federal paper, crisp and official, the kind of letter that made even steady hands shake. A new storm was forming, and neither numbers nor kindness would keep it at bay. A federal inquiry does not care about your story. It asks for receipts, for intent, for the kind of truth that stands when strangers press. The letter arrived before dawn, its seal sharp against the cream envelope. By 8, the news had spread through every hallway. The company was under investigation for suspected tax evasion through shell consultancies. Contracts paused, vendors went quiet, phones rang with questions no one wanted to answer. A hum of fear ran through the mill, thin and constant, like air moving through a drafty house. By mid-morning, the war room was set up. It had once been a training space, now cleared of chairs, its walls lined with whiteboards. Tables stood in rows, binders towered on them, heavy with records. The air grew thin under the weight of what they held. Departments spilled their paperwork into the room. Finance came first, dropping boxes that smelled of basement dust and stale ink. Operations followed, arms full of contracts that reached back a decade. Marketing arrived with folders so colorful they looked like they belonged at a school fair, though inside were receipts, invoices, and signatures waiting to be questioned. Claire stepped in at Graham's request. She was not there to run errands. He had asked for her because she had no loyalty to the gloss that had built this place. She came with clear eyes and steady hands. The first thing she did was set up 2 tables. One for intake, where papers would land fresh from departments, the other for triage, where she would sort, tag, and route them. She color-coded without fanfare green for contracts, yellow for vendor records, blue for tax filings, red for anything unclear. She wrote labels in block letters so anyone could follow. Then she brewed coffee strong and steady, leaving the pot on a side table with clean cups. In times like this, even caffeine could feel like leadership. Fear threaded the room. People bent over boxes, flipping pages too quickly, muttering to themselves. The silence was sharper than words. Claire walked between tables, voice low, instructions simple. Green here, red if it doesn't add up, breathe. She did not raise her tone. Calm was its own authority. Graham stood near the door, jacket off, tie loosened. He watched her work. He had built his life on polish, on command that flowed one way. Now he saw someone building order from chaos with small choices. Choices that looked like care disguised as structure. He said little, but he stayed. His presence kept the panic from spilling over, but it was Claire's system that gave people something to do with their hands, and by extension, with their fear. The hours stretched, papers piled, dust from old files clung to skin. The air smelled of ink, coffee, and sweat. Claire logged each box, scanned where she could, cross-checked entries. She refused to be rushed. She let threads sit until they revealed patterns. It was the patience of someone who knew that the truth did not come to those who grabbed, but to those who waited and looked closely. By evening of the first day, the outlines of the company's heartbeat were visible. Payroll records stacked clean. Vendor agreements matched invoices. Tax filings lined up year over year. On the surface, things looked orderly. But Claire felt a dissonance, faint but steady, like a low note hidden in music. On the second day, the pattern sharpened. Invoices that seemed ordinary repeated too neatly. Monthly payments, identical amounts. Vague descriptions like consulting services or strategic planning. They ran through different departments, but the checks all landed in the same account. Claire paused. She held the stack in her hands, felt the rhythm of it. Numbers alone did not trouble her, but repetition without reason did. She pulled older records, traced the dates backward. The payments began just before a major retail partnership had been announced. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. She spread the documents across the triage table, tagging them red. She wrote short notes in the margins, arrows connecting lines. When she looked up, Graham was watching. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. She handed him the sheets without preamble. A path. He scanned them, eyes narrowing. The lines were clear enough for anyone willing to look. Around them, the war room buzzed on. Clerks typed, managers whispered, interns fetched copies. To them, Claire and Graham were just two more figures at the center of a storm. But the air between them shifted. They both knew this was the thread that could unravel everything. By the end of the second day, fatigue hung heavy, eyes were red, shirts wrinkled. Claire kept moving, her rhythm steady, her presence an anchor. She did not push harder than people could bear. She paced them instead, letting breaks happen, pouring coffee, reminding them that order mattered more than speed. That night, when the room finally emptied, she lingered over the red-tagged pile. She flipped each page again, slower, as if the paper might whisper what it had been hiding. The descriptions remained vague, the payees faceless, the amounts too regular to be honest. On the third morning, she brought fresh markers and a new notebook. She drew a timeline on the whiteboard, each payment marked in red, each corporate milestone above it in black. The pattern leapt out. Expansion deals lined up with transfers. Quarterly bumps in reported growth followed each surge of consulting fees. No single document screamed fraud, but together they hummed with intent. She stood back, marker still in her hand, and let the sight settle. This was no accident of bookkeeping. This was design. The room grew quiet as others noticed the board. Even those who didn't understand the details felt the weight of what it meant. Claire turned, meeting Graham's eyes. For the first time since the letter arrived, He looked less like a man guarding his company and more like a man realizing it could all be stripped away. The path was there. A name would follow. The consultancy sounded respectable. It said nothing, but the reference letter that pointed to it, she knew it would say everything. Betrayal is worst when it knows your childhood street. The paperwork does not flinch when it writes the name. The red-tagged pile had grown thick, each page marked with Claire's steady hand. She worked through them without drama, letting ink and numbers speak. The payments repeated like a drumbeat monthly, identical, vague. All pointed toward Stonebridge Advisory, a consultancy that sounded solid enough but showed little in its corporate shell. No staff lists, no office photographs. Just a post office box in Raleigh and a name that promised stability while saying nothing. She requested older HR records, boxes that smelled of dust and glue. Late in the afternoon, she pulled one thin folder free. Inside lay a reference letter, typed in neat courier font years ago. The address on the letterhead matched Stonebridge's filings. The signature at the bottom was clean, confident, familiar. Logan Price, 46 now, Chief Financial Officer, Graham's boyhood friend. Claire held the page steady, though her breath caught. She had no history with the name, but Graham would. She slid the letter across the table to him. He read the lines once, then again. His hand did not move from the page. His jaw tightened. His eyes, usually so steady, shifted away from hers. Logan, the boy who had stood beside him in Little League photographs, dusty uniforms, caps too large. The teenager who had helped him build a science fair project from the scrap wood and tin foil. Proud smiles in front of a county banner. The man who had walked with him through the early years of Whitaker Hearth and Timber, balancing ledgers while Graham sold the vision. Now, his name sat tied to a hollow firm, draining money from the company and risking the town's livelihood. The line from friendship to fraud was not straight. It bent through envy, through access, through years of quiet grievance. Graham felt the bends as clearly as if he had walked them himself. Claire did not add judgment. She assembled the pieces without cruelty. Facts would be enough. She stacked the invoices, the reference letter, the timeline that showed how Logan had built his shadow firm alongside the company's growth. The picture needed no embellishment. For a long moment, Graham said nothing. He held the letter, but his gaze had traveled decades back. He saw himself at 15, on a stage at the county fair, holding a plaque while Logan stood beside him. Behind them, rows of empty chairs, parents absent, pride lonely. He remembered the choice he made that year to depend on no one, to let control be armor. He understood now why he had chosen it. He also understood what it had cost. Silence spread through the war room. Clerks moved carefully around them, sensing the weight of discovery. No one spoke. No one needed to. Claire began sorting the files again, her movements steady, as if keeping rhythm could anchor them both. She did not press Graham for a response. She left the silence intact, knowing it carried more truth than words could. The night stretched, page after page. They built the trail solid, each invoice placed in order, each bank transfer highlighted, each signature marked, together. The evidence formed a spine that no one could dismiss. By midnight, the table was covered in rows of red tags, each pointing back to Logan. The next move would have to be careful. Clean enough to convince regulators. Quiet enough to protect a town that still needed the mill's paychecks. Claire closed her notebook, her hand pausing on the cover. Graham leaned back, his face drawn, the years showing sharper than usual. He had not spoken Logan's name aloud all evening. He didn't need to. It was written across every page in front of them. They left the war room in silence. The mill's hallways were dark, only the exit signs glowing green. Outside, the river moved under the moonlight, steady, indifferent, carrying secrets with it. Inside, two people carried one truth betrayal had come not from strangers, but from a man who once knew their childhood streets. Some partnerships are born on battlefields. Others are born at a wooden table under a single lamp, when exhaustion makes honesty easier than pride. The archive room smelled of dust and ink. the air thick with paper that had outlived generations of clerks. Folders leaned in crooked stacks, boxes sagged at the corners. A single desk lamp cast a circle of light, leaving the edges of the room in shadow. It was here that Claire and Graham chose to work, not the boardroom, not the office with its wide windows, but a quiet room where only records spoke, files spread across the table, invoices lined in neat rows, red tags marking the path they had traced. Claire flipped pages slowly, cross-checking signatures and dates. Graham read beside her, silent, his jacket hung on the back of a chair. For hours, the only sounds were the shuffle of paper, the scratch of pens, the steady tick of the wall clock. As the night deepened, small shifts began to show. Graham, who usually moved through the building like a storm cloud, softened. When Martha passed the open doorway, pushing her cleaning cart, he looked up and said, "Thank you." "Martha?" Her pause was visible, surprise flashing before she smiled. Later, when Ray came to lock up the side door, Graham asked about his granddaughter, and his voice held genuine curiosity. The guard answered, and Graham listened, really listened, until Ray's shoulders eased. Claire noticed every detail. The way Graham's eyes lingered longer than before. The way he set his pen down to give attention instead of keeping his head bent. It was new, fragile, but real. She saw the outline of a man who had grown up needing to be impressive because being loved had never been offered. Control had been his armor, competence his disguise. She refused to confuse them. She recognized both, and she did not flinch. She worked steadily, her hands moving with calm precision, even as her thoughts circled the human cost of what they were uncovering. The company could still be saved, but it would take more than clean ledgers. It would take the willingness to repair trust with the same care they used to line up figures. The hours stretched thin, coffee cooled in the pot, pens ran out of ink. Still they pressed on, arranging the files into a coherent chain. Each invoice was logged, each transfer highlighted, each discrepancy noted, piece by piece. The scattered records became a story that could stand in the face of scrutiny. Near midnight, Claire leaned back and rubbed her eyes. The timeline was clear now, visible across the whiteboard where they had mapped every payment. Stonebridge Advisory stood revealed as the hollow channel it was. The path of betrayal lay in red ink for anyone willing to follow. Graham stood in front of the board, his shadow stretching long behind him. For once, his expression was not iron. It was weary, almost human. He exhaled, a sound less like command and more like surrender. "They'll clear us," Claire said softly. "If we catch the leak in the act, the company will stand." He nodded, not to her but to the truth she had laid out. The armor he had carried for decades was not gone, but for the first time, it had cracks that let the man beneath show through. They packed the files into neat stacks, labeled and ready. The war room had been chaos. The archive room was order. Between the two of them, a plan had formed, quiet, precise, enough to steer the company out of accusation if carried through carefully. When they finally left, the hallway was empty. The only light the dim green of exit signs. Graham carried a box under one arm. Claire carried her notebook. They walked side by side. No words needed. Outside, the air was cool, the river whispering as it moved past the mill. The night was heavy with fatigue, but also with something steadier, the knowledge that they had built a record that could survive unfriendly eyes. By morning, the work would continue, and with it, a test neither of them had expected. For Claire, an offer would come that looked like mercy for her bank account. For Graham, the question would be whether he could hold on to the company without holding on to his armor. A clean offer arrived with the kind of promise that could steady anyone's breath, a salary that could cover every bill, a title that fit the work she already carried. The question was not, can she go? The question was, should she? Evan Carlyle introduced himself with Polish, but without pretense. 38, a private investor with a reputation for fairness. He had been following Claire's work quietly. He invited her to Charleston to lead an operation within his growing home goods portfolio. The role would carry authority, full benefits, and freedom to design systems as humane as she believed they should be. He spoke with confidence, but not pressure, laying the opportunity out as if setting a plate at a table. It was there, waiting, if she wished to take it. Claire listened, her thoughts circling. Her mother, Janet's medical appointments loomed large in her mind. Each bill chipped away at savings. Dependable coverage would mean relief, security. Fewer nights spent with worry stacked like unopened envelopes on the counter. The offer glittered with that relief. But her thoughts did not stop there. They returned to the mill, to the kitchen she had quietly rebuilt with coffee pots labeled by strength and biscuits wrapped in notes. They returned to Martha, who now smiled when she passed, to Sharon, who lingered in the mornings a little longer, to Ray, whose river reports were once ignored but now received with nods. People stood straighter than they had months ago. The smallest mercies had begun to grow roots. Could she walk away from that? Not long after Evan's visit, a photograph began circulating through the building, grainy, taken through glass. It showed Claire and Graham working late in the archive room, papers spread across the table, lamplight pooling between them, nothing more than colleagues bent over files. Yet whispers filled the halls. Stories grew in the spaces, facts left empty. Claire did not chase the rumors. She met them with silence and with work. Her focus remained steady, her steps unhurried. Noise could not rewrite what she had done or what she intended to do. At her desk, she laid the Charleston offer beside her notebook. She did not mark a yes or no. She held it with open hands, waiting for her own answer to arrive. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with her mother across from her. Janet's hands were thin, the veins visible, her eyes soft with fatigue. Claire poured tea, the steam curling upward. She did not speak of Charleston, not yet. Instead, she listened as her mother described a neighbor's visit, a church supper, the ache in her back that had worsened in the rain. Claire smiled, nodded, offered comfort. Inside, she weighed the kind of relief Charleston would bring against the kind of meaning Ashford had already given. In the quiet after her mother went to bed, she made a list in her mind, not of pros and cons, but of responsibilities. Where could she do the most good right now, with what she knew and who she was? Her private checklist took shape: relief for her mother's care, stability for herself, dignity for the people at the mill, integrity for a company whose books carried more than numbers. Each line pulled against the others. None could be ignored. By morning, the offer still lay on her desk, crisp and clean. But another demand pressed harder. The plan to catch Logan was moving into place. The window to act would be short, the consequences long. Decision would not wait. What kind of leader each of them would become? Claire, Graham, even Logan would be revealed not in speeches but in the actions of the days ahead. Reckoning does not always arrive under bright lights. Sometimes it slips into a gym lined with quilts, a raffle table heavy with pies, and the sound of a fiddle carrying across folding chairs. Claire's part began at a desk, not a stage. She drafted a fabricated proposal for a grant expansion too tempting, too polished, carrying numbers just wide enough to attract the wrong eyes. It was seeded with care. She placed it in a folder only one person would ever have reason to open: Logan Price, the CFO who had been Graham's friend since boyhood. The wording was deliberate, not sloppy, not overt, just enough to lure a man already accustomed to bending figures into private shapes. It sat in silence on the company server, like bait on a riverbank, waiting. Federal partners, quiet in posture and precise in method, set up monitoring. They did not announce themselves. They asked for discretion, for timing that respected the mill and the town tethered to its survival. They knew that when livelihoods are bound to one roof, truth must arrive without spectacle. The timing matched the St. Helena Hospital Gala, an annual gathering as steady as the seasons. The gymnasium at the high school filled with quilts stitched by church hands, pies carried in on glass plates, and music strung from banjos and mandolins. It was not glamour, it was care, visible in fabric squares and buttered crusts. Logan came dressed in a suit too fine for the room. He moved between donors with the smile of a man practiced in persuasion. His words landed heavy, polished for advantage. He shook hands with those who had trusted him for years. He leaned close to whisper promises about growth, about future security, about numbers that always seemed just around the corner. In the background, Claire sat with Graham at a table near the wall. Paper plates held half-eaten slices of pecan pie. Their conversation was low, their eyes on the small stage where a trio sang about rivers and fields. They did not need to look at Logan. They knew where the eyes that mattered were trained. When the bait moved, lifted from the server, copied, and shifted onto a burner account, agents did not pounce. They simply marked the time. They traced the path as it lit up on their screens. And when the account began to route messages beyond the county line, they stepped in. There was no scene, no cuffs displayed, no voice raised. Logan was guided out of the gym with firm hands. His expression caught somewhere between disbelief and resignation. The music did not stop. The quilts still hung. Children still ran between the rows. The moment was not cruel. It was necessary. Stonebridge Advisory folded in the weeks that followed. Its shell cracked open, revealing payments that explained too many shadows. The federal inquiry narrowed its scope. It cleared the company's intent and pinned fault where it belonged. The danger of collapse lifted, though the weight of what had almost been remained. Back at the mill, the board convened not in a grand chamber, but in a small conference room with fluorescent light and a dented table. The kind of room where decisions taste more like work than like power. Graham sat at the head, shoulders less rigid than before. He looked at faces that had once feared him and now waited, guarded, for something different. He spoke without flourish. He acknowledged that distance had hardened into harm, that numbers had been tended more carefully than people. His words were brief, but they carried a shift. Then Claire spoke. She did not lean on rhetoric. She named what repair must look like in policy, not in promises, restored benefits, beginning with health coverage and transit stipends, transparent books, open for employee review at set intervals, a practice of listening, not delegated to HR, but practiced by leadership, not once a year, every month. The room held stillness after she finished. It was not silence of fear, but silence of measure, of people weighing whether they believed what they had just heard. Claire did not press. She knew repair does not live in speeches. It lives in calendars, in budgets, in lines that do not move when no one is looking. That evening, she wrote a letter to Evan Carlisle. She thanked him for his offer, for the faith it carried, for the relief it could have brought her family. And then she declined, with gratitude and with peace. Her work here was not finished. The board ratified the changes within the week. Notices went out quietly, restoring what had been cut. Martha Lee received confirmation that her surgery would be covered. Sharon from IT saw transit vouchers returned to her paycheck. The kitchen once again held snacks after 3. Small details, yet each a signal that the ledger had remembered the people who filled its lines. The company exhaled for the first time in months. Relief spread. But it did not feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility regained, like a roof repaired after a storm, no celebration, just the steady shelter of knowing it would hold. Graham lingered in the hallway one evening after the board meeting, his reflection caught in the glass of a framed photograph. It showed the mill decades earlier, men in coveralls standing shoulder to shoulder, women with aprons and tired smiles. He studied the image, then turned to where Claire gathered her things. He did not speak grandly. He simply said, "Thank you." She nodded. Gratitude did not need decoration. Morning light on the brick mill looked different when the people inside were safe. Not brighter, not more golden, but steadier. Now came the harder part, turning repair into habit. Repair is not a speech. It is a calendar of choices. It is a paycheck with dignity inside it. The first signals came quickly. Pension matches resumed without delay. Notices were printed in plain language, not jargon, so everyone could understand. Numbers were exact. Schedules were clear. Promises no longer floated in the air. They landed in envelopes that employees opened with cautious relief. The health plan expanded. Coverage for routine care grew broader. Prescriptions carried less sting at the pharmacy counter. Martha Lee received the letter confirming her cataract surgery would be fully covered. She held it in both hands, reading it twice, then a third time, as if her sight had already sharpened. From that foundation, a new program appeared, the Wellness and Dignity Initiative, designed for older employees. It included transportation vouchers for those who no longer drove and dedicated clinic hours in partnership with the St. Helena Hospital. The pamphlet was simple, the title gentle, but its meaning ran deep. It told people their years of service had not been forgotten. For younger workers, apprenticeships opened in carpentry, design, and logistics. Interns who once thought they would have to leave town to matter now saw a path to learn, to earn, and to remain part of Ashford's story. The message was clear. You belong here, and your work counts. The kitchen changed too, not through spectacle, but through steady provision. Real coffee brewed each morning, strong and easy, with labels as Claire had once written by hand. Fresh fruit replaced stale candy in the bowl by the fridge. On Fridays, a domino set appeared at lunch, the clack of tiles echoing against laughter that had been absent for too long. A suggestion box was mounted near the break room door. Every second Monday it was emptied, the slips read, the ideas logged. Some were small, better chairs, new paint for the hallway. Some were larger, flexible shifts. Safety upgrades, none were ignored. Even when an idea could not be done, the reason was explained. Trust lived in the explanation as much as in the yes. Graham began walking the floor, not in haste, not in show. He moved slowly, stopping at stations, greeting people by name. He asked about grandchildren, about dogs, about gardens. He did not hurry the answers. He carried them away, remembered them, repeated them the next time. It was not charm, it was practice, a new kind of ledger, one of names and lives instead of numbers. In meetings, he stepped back, he let managers speak first. He let coordinators defend their own work. He learned to listen without folding his arms across his chest. It was awkward at times, but awkwardness was proof of effort. Control gave way to trust, one pause at a time. Claire's role shifted too. She accepted a new title, Director of People in Practice. It was more than a nameplate on a door. It carried authority to defend culture the way one defends a budget line that cannot be cut. She managed policies, yes, but more than that, she protected the rhythm of dignity that had begun to hum again through the building. She treated it as infrastructure, as necessary as beams and bolts. She did not wear the role like armor. She wore it like work clothes, sleeves ready to roll. She walked hallways, answered questions, and made sure the systems held. Culture was not sentiment, it was structure, and she kept it steady. At the riverbank one evening, as the sun lowered and the bricks of the mill glowed gold, Graham stood beside her. The water moved slow, reflecting light that softened the hard edges of stone. He spoke without performance, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Partnership, he said, not in speeches, in clarity. She did not answer with flourish. She answered with steadiness. A nod, a wordless agreement that what they had begun was worth carrying forward. The mill itself bore witness. Its windows caught the golden hour, shining not with grandeur, but with warmth. Machines rested, their noise stilled for the night. Workers stepped out, lunch pails tucked under arms, coats slung loose. They walked toward houses they could keep, toward families who could breathe easier, toward clinics where eyes could be treated. Heritage, Claire thought, was not brick. It was not framed photos on walls. Heritage was mercy written into policy. It was fairness woven into payroll. It was the choice, day after day, to build systems that did not punish, but protected. The town adjusted with care. Shops felt the lift of steady paychecks. Church suppers filled with less worry and more laughter. The school board noted higher attendance. Fewer children sitting at desks with hunger in their stomachs. It was not perfection. It was not triumph. It was repair. And repair, once begun, required habit. On a late Friday afternoon, Claire walked the floor. She passed the domino table, where Sharon laughed with two younger clerks. She stopped by the break room to refill the fruit bowl. She nodded at Ray as he gave his usual river report, this time met with 3 replies instead of silence. The hum of the place was back, not loud, not flashy, just steady. The company, once gasping, now breathed in rhythm with its people. As the sun set, the mill glowed against the river, its bricks touched by gold. Inside, dignity was no longer a hope. It was a practice. And in that glow, a community reset its posture toward the future, not with boasts, not with banners, but with the calm that follows right work done. The story did not end with a triumph. It ended with a habit, kindness with backbone, carried forward one choice at a time. True leadership is not measured in profit margins or polished presentations. It is measured in the quiet ways people are treated when no one is watching. Graham Whitaker's story reminds us that control can build walls, but compassion builds bridges. When Claire Bennett chose honesty over silence and care over fear, she revealed that dignity is not an extra benefit at work. It is the foundation that allows people to stand tall. In our own lives, we may not run companies or face federal inquiries, but we all carry influence. The way we greet a neighbor, the patience we show to a grandchild, the attention we give to someone's unspoken need. These are acts of leadership. They may not make headlines, but they make communities stronger. Repair, whether in a business or in a family, does not come from speeches. It comes from daily choices to listen, to restore what was lost, to protect what truly matters. We are never too old to remember that kindness with backbone is not weakness, it is strength. And when we choose it, we leave behind more than memories. We leave a legacy of mercy written into the everyday lives of others. Thank you for spending your time with Shining Stories. If this story touched your heart, we'd be grateful if you could press like, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope, dignity, and resilience to life. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.